Y'all ready? I am.
All right, here we are fishing in the middle of March, and interesting weather going on right now in Florida. This is the northwest corner of Florida, Big Bend. So we're kind of out of the really cold weather, so we're not really having a few days of cold weather, but we still are having some cooler nights, although the days are getting kind of warm. So what that means is the fish are not necessarily in their winter patterns, but they're also not necessarily in their spring patterns yet. So it kind of is a little bit of a difficult time to find fish. And so I thought, what a perfect situation to make a video about how to find fish. So what we're going to do is just take you along for the ride today as we try a variety of different techniques in a variety of different places. So typically in the wintertime, your wintertime pattern is usually, if it's really cold, the fish are going to hold low and they're going to hold deep, and you've got to fish slower and you've got to fish on the bottom, and you're looking for like deep holes and deep pockets, which they may still be doing somewhat, but also since we do have some warmer water temperatures and we do have some warmer daytime temperatures, the fish could also be transitioning out onto the flats. So again, you just got to try some different things out. You just got to find them. And so we're going to do a variety of different techniques from the bottom of the water column up to the top, and just show you what we're using, how we're using it, and how we're finding fish today. So starting off with today, I'm going to be using this lure, the DOA Bait Buster. As you can see, the flats to my left, you can see crab traps sticking out. So it's a little bit too shallow for that right now. And I'm sitting right on the edge of a drop-off, deep moving water trough. You can see the water moving. That's one good thing about saltwater fishing. Good thing to always remember, fish eat when the water moves. And so you want to make sure you're picking tides and fishing at times where the water is moving, because that is the dinner bell. It makes bait fish and crabs and shrimp move, and that's when the fish are going to feed. So we've got moving water, tides going out, but I'm not worried because I'm right next to a deep trough. And we're going to go ahead and do a wintertime technique, and we're going to fish deep water with a smaller 3 to 4 inch bait bouncing right along the bottom, and we're going to see what happens. Expectation here would be a trout or a flounder, possibly a redfish. There's a fish right there. That would be a trout. It's all right, babe, I'll boat flip him. All right, so right now, wintertime technique, getting the job done. This one's a little too small. Don't know if I can put that in the video.
Oh, are you recording this?
Yeah.
Oh.
All right, so the Bait Buster is like a suspending bait that we just threw, but I can also let it sink to the bottom, and we were catching a few small trout on that. I tried a heavier lure, like a 1/2 ounce shrimp jig on the bottom, and nothing. So now I'm going to try a suspending twitch bait. This is a hard bait called the Live Target Bait Ball design, and it's kind of like a Miradine type suspending twitch bait. And so since they're not hitting stuff like flat on the bottom, I'm going to try this really slow sink suspending twitch bait, and maybe that'll work. So let's see what happens here. I tried 2 different lures. I also tried a 3-inch DOA cow with a 3/4 ounce head. Again, something thumping the bottom hard, which is normally dynamite in the wintertime, and not a single bite. But did get 2 fish on the slow sink Bait Buster. So let's try a slow sink suspending twitch bait, see what happens. There he is. Small. Okay. Well, They're going the wrong way on the size.
Does that mean we should go somewhere else?
Not necessarily. All right, so there's one fish on the suspending twitch bait. The nice thing about when I say suspending, it sinks very, very slowly. And the nice thing about a bait that does that is you can adjust your technique and your casting with the current and the drift. If you are drifting, we're anchored right now, but you can adjust a couple variables to determine how low or how high on the water column you fish it. So it's a bait, like I said, that you can really have tied on year round. And if you're fishing wintertime, deeper water, you can just simply retrieve it slower, let it sink a lot more. And if you're trying to keep it up near the surface, you just retrieve it faster. Now, I'm not reeling. I was reeling when I cast it this way because the water's going this way. So I needed to reel to retrieve my slack and to stay tight with the lure a little bit. But now that my lure has kind of gotten downstream, people make the mistake of retrieving it the same way they did when it was upstream. But when it's downstream, now you have the pressure of all that water that's going to naturally rise that lure up. So slow your retrieve down as you get downstream. In fact, sometimes if I know I'm in a good area and I'm downstream, I'll actually open my bail, let some line out, let that lure drop, and then start retrieving it again. So the bait buster, the DOA bait buster, definitely was getting a lot more attention, so we're going to switch back off to that. So right now, without a doubt, suspending twitch bait was okay. Bottom bouncing jigs, not working. Probably again because we're not in a wintertime pattern. So we're going to go back to this DOA shallow runner slow sink bait buster and give that another run. I personally think that the DOA bait buster is the best finger mullet imitation on the market, and it has been for a long time. I know that's a very bold statement. There's a lot of lures that in your hand out of the water look a lot more like a finger mullet, but there's something about what this bait buster does not look like an appealing lure out of the water. Everyone tells me that, and I agree. It looks pretty stupid. But in the water, when you watch how it works, it is just the perfect finger mullet presentation. And I've tried different finger mullet lures alongside the bait buster, and it's not that they don't work, it's just that I seem to still have better luck with the bait buster. There's a reason why a lure stays in production for a long time, because it's an OG. Okay, I'm gonna make one more cast with the bait buster, and then we're going to try to move slightly. There he is. Bait buster strikes again. That's probably a legal fish, but he's right at that 15-inch mark, and I think we're going for better than that today. What you think?
Yeah.
All right. Now, one thing that happens with the bait buster is that the hook will come out, the body will slide up. Oop, I about fell in the water. The body will slide up the line, which actually protects the lure from getting damaged. All you got to do, make sure first of all that this little straw piece is up on that bend and running parallel the hook shank. That has to be right. Then there's a cavity in the back that you push that in, and then just pull your line until the nose comes right through, and you're ready to go again. So without a doubt, bait buster is the ticket for now. The other thing, and this may sound very stupid, superstitious, and you're probably right, but I don't know why, always seems to work. Whenever I'm fishing in a spot and I start threatening to leave, I always get a hit or a fish. So you just heard me talk about leaving, and the fish bit. And even though they're kind of not the size that I want, that old adage of never leave fish to find fish, I don't really remember that not being the truth, because I've left fish before that either weren't biting as fast as I wanted them to, or they weren't as big as I wanted them to be, and then I wasn't able to get back on fish again for a long time that day. So there's fish here. So if there's fish in an area, whether they be small or not biting as quickly as you would want them to, the reason why the fish are there is because there's something they like. And if there's something they like, then that's where you should be fishing. I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but that water is moving really nice. I always look for that. You could literally be in a spot and you could look over here and see no water moving. Then you look a little bit to the right and you can clearly see water moving. You need to cast where the water's moving. While I'm fishing, I'm gonna give you another tip. So obviously you can see it's really shallow. You can see the bottom. Here you really can't. If you look behind the boat here, but you can see I'm anchored on the transition. This is another good tip. If at all possible, do not anchor on top of your fish. They don't like that. So I'm anchored over here on the side in the shallow water, and I'm casting into unadulterated water that my boat is not interfering with. If I can, there he is. Could be a flounder. It is a flounder.
No, not escaping.
No. Oh, that's a good fish. That's a good trout. That trout will go in the cooler. Nice. Nice. That is a quality fish right there. Really nice trout. Woo!
You're welcome.
See that? I almost didn't get that one. That's why they're getting off the hook so easy. Kind of a gear check. Tell you what, my setup I'm throwing right here in case you're interested in this. I got this at an auction, and I'm turning out to really like it. So it's a Penn Battle 3000, 2500, 3000, 2000. It's kind of a good size for the flats fishing that we do, with 10-pound Power Pro braided line. And this rod is called a Shakespeare Wild Series. I really don't even think it's designed for saltwater. Honestly, I think it might be more like a salmon rod, or I don't really even think it's a saltwater rod, but it's an 8-footer, 2-piece 8-footer. And about the longest rod I've ever had for saltwater is 7.5 feet. But when I saw it, I thought, well, that might be a good like popper cork cut bait rod, or, you know, and I got it for a really good price. It's about a $300 setup, and I got it for $75, and it was hardly ever used. But I tell you, I've been throwing all kind of lures with this thing, and I love it. I don't really love that it's a 2-piece, although for an 8-foot rod, I get why they did a 2-piece, because I'm just not a huge fan of a 2-piece rod. But man, I love this thing because it's so sensitive in the tip, but it's got a lot of fish fighting power because of the length, and you can really fling a lure far. So I've used it for a variety of different lures, and I really, really do like it. But typically speaking, when you're flats fishing for trout, redfish, and flounder, a good rule of thumb would be about I would say about a 7-foot rod. I would go with 6 to 15 pound, rated for 6 to 15 pound line, because I think 10 to 15 pound line is all you need. I mean, I know some people will think this is crazy, but we were catching 100-pound tarpon on 15-pound braid, and whenever we did get broke off, it was the 60 to 80-pound leader that was breaking before the 15-pound braid. So 15-pound braid is pretty good. So I'm an open flat, so I'm using 10-pound braid, and I'm using a 20-pound mono or fluorocarbon leader, about a 2 to 3 foot leader. And so if you get a rod that's medium to medium light, you know, rated for like 6 to 12, 6 to 15 pound line, and again about a 2,000 to 3,000 size reel, you're good. You could go up to a 4,000 size reel if you're using 15 pound braid. You probably would want to go to like a 3,000 to a 4,000 reel. But if you're using 10 pound braid, a 2,000 to 3,000 would be what I would recommend. Because if you're fishing with cut bait or live bait, I mean, you could use a telephone pole on a crappy reel and it's not gonna matter. But if you're casting and working lures, you will not work the lure well, you won't feel the bite well, and you will wear yourself out if you end up using too heavy a tackle, which is a mistake I see a lot of people do, especially when they're new into saltwater. I did the same thing. I just assumed saltwater, you got to have huge stuff. All right, we're changing tactics. We're on the flats. We're going to fish the flats and then working our way up toward the grass line as the tide comes in. So I'm switching techniques. I like using a jig head. I like using a jig head like this when I'm thumping the bottom in deep, fast moving water. But then when I'm fishing the flats or shallow water, I like going to a weighted swim bait hook with a spring on the front. So now I'm going to take my lure. I'm just going to twist it on. I literally just took this lure off the jig head, twist it onto the spring eye until it's upright, and then you can line up the hook to see where you should come out at right there. So I put my finger right where I want the hook to come out at, and now I just go right according to what I did, and you have a perfectly rigged swim bait hook or swim bait. And then the next lure I'm going to tie on is going to be a topwater. Might be a little too early for topwater fishing, but I'm going to have it on. This is a Rapala Skitterwalk, one of my favorite topwaters. This is a SW11, that's the bigger size. SW8 is the smaller size. I like the SW8 when the fish are finicky. I just don't have one with me, so we're going to try the 11. And sometimes even if the fish aren't biting well, people think that topwater only works when the fish are biting good. But actually, if they're not biting good, you can irritate them to strike with a topwater. So I'm going to tie that on. We're going to start fishing here up shallow. All right, so now we're approaching the shoreline here. The wind is pushing me in. It's always good to know where the wind's coming from and decide where you position your boat based on the wind and where it's going to push you. So this shoreline kind of runs that way, and that's the same way the wind is pushing me. So it's going to push me. I'd rather it push me kind of parallel the shore than straight at it, because you know, if you go straight at it, you don't really have a lot of time before it pushes you in the grass. You can always anchor before the grass, but then you're limited. You're only stuck to fishing that one spot. Whereas if I can find a shoreline that parallels the wind, start upwind on that shoreline, then you have a lot more time to fish. I'm standing up. If you have the ability to do that, that's great, because then you can see sometimes fish or potholes or rocks or different discolorations in the bottom, which all these things are things that you would obviously want to cast at. This area has a little bit of a sandy beach line kind of right before the grass, which holds flounder sometimes. Caught a really nice one last time there, so we'll eventually do that, but I'm going to just let it push me down this bank first and see what happens here. So I'm literally just going to, this wind is just going to push me perfectly right around this corner, and so I'm just going to work this bank all around in. And that's what you want to do. You want to take the time to drive to a spot to start and let the wind and the current do the rest, because now I can sit here and just fish and not have to worry about cranking up the motor, doing all that work, spooking the fish, and I can just fish. So take that extra time to position your boat to a good starting point, and then kill the motor and just let the wind take you for a good drift. The other nice thing about drifting like this is I've got the wind at my back. So with the wind at my back, I can make very easy casts and I can work my lure and stay in contact with my lure and feel my lure and what it's doing and what it needs to do. So you probably heard the saying before, the wind is your friend. So people complain about the wind. Oftentimes that's because they just don't know how to adjust and use the wind to their advantage, and so they're just constantly fighting it. Oh!
Oh, I see something.
Yep, there's a redfish right at the boat. Coming at my top water right at the boat. And I just ran out of real estate. Okay, so these fish are just acting very spooky and scared, so I'm gonna go to something small. Very small, easy to eat, easy to chase. Let's see if downsizing the lure will make a difference for us. There he is, there he is. That's it. That's it. That feels like a heavy fish. Feels like a heavy fish. That's a big redfish. There we go.
And this is a redfish.
Yep. So that tactic worked. The fish were really finicky, really not biting too well. So I went with just a smaller lure, slower presentation, and slurped it right up. Oh, 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 oh. Okay, that worked. Got a nice little dark bottom here. I like really dark bottom for redfish. There's like rocks and oysters and stuff. We're near that 3 o'clock high tide. And yeah, tried the top water, had one follow it. And the top water is about a 4-inch lure. And then I was throwing that DOA bait butter, which was a 4-inch lure. And I think I was having follows and maybe a small bite every now and then, but nothing committing. So when that happens, you just downsize. And so I downsized to one of my favorite year-round lures and colors, which is the DOA Cow, the 3-inch. Root beer gold glitter with chartreuse tail. And just that swim bait hook. And I have a technique of working it that I call spoon feeding. And what I mean is, so I throw it out and I reel it very slow, kind of keeping it toward the bottom, and then I pop it and stop, and then I reel really slow and I pop it and stop, and I reel really slow and I pop it and stop. And the reason why I call that spoon feeding is when you're reeling it really slow, that tail is vibrating and the fish will start following. And then a lot of times he hasn't decided if he's going to eat it or not yet. He's just following it. And then when you do that sharp pop, sometimes that pop is what triggers him to, oh, it's getting away, and he'll go ahead and fire on it. Or when you pop it and stop, it literally just falls, like he's following it, and it just falls right back in his face and they eat it. So that's a good technique on a tough fishing day, and it produced probably a nice 24, 25-inch long redfish. We'll see if we can get another one. And what I do when I'm anchored, like I'm anchored right now, was drifting before, and it just drifted me all over the fish before I could put the anchor down. But I'm anchored now, and I'm just gonna fan cast, bang, 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 bang. And after you've sat in one spot and you've pretty much fan casted the whole, gamut, then you can move, reposition over there some, or reposition over there some, and do it again. So I'm probably gonna go over that way next once I've kind of fanned this really good, just to see if there's any more redfish around here. Redfish do tend to school together, hang together, so typically if you do catch one, there usually are other ones in the area. And again, people say I don't like the wind. The wind, there he is, just like that. So people say they don't like the wind, but I can cast further, the wind's at my back, and the fish can't see me because the water's choppy. This is a lower slot redfish, I think. He's coming at me. I don't know which side of the boat he's going to go on. This is going to get scary. Little guy. So that is a lower slot redfish. I think I'm gonna let him go. I think he's 18 inches, but barely. Look at that tail. Ain't that cool? Look at the tail, babe, watch.
Oh, I thought you were talking from the camera.
Well, I'm talking to them and you see. See the blue?